Nearly 30% of Gen Z said they would like to save, but don't make enough money.
That's not even the American dream anymore. That's not even possible.
In fact, 46% of millennials and 32% of Gen Z have more credit card debt than emergency savings.
Okay, so I put on my Somerset Patriots hat today because we are going back home in this video. We're going to be watching a video from CNBC titled Why So Many Young Adults Are Still Living with Their Parents in the US, and this covers a family back up in New Jersey where I'm from. So I thought it'd be a little fun to check out this video along with it being on topic with a lot of the housing crisis issues we've seen, but let's just get right into it.
About 1 in 3 Americans between 18 and 34 years old live with their parents.
And while you may have heard more about this recently, this trend isn't new.
Between 2005 and 2015, the share just grew very steeply over this 10-year period. Since then, it's been fairly stable. There was an uptick, of course, during the pandemic. In the wake of the pandemic, those rates of parental co-residence are now about where they were right before. Part of the reason we see this escalation of young adults not leaving the nest or returning to the nest is this idea that it was harder and harder for them to weather shocks.
Nearly 30% of Gen Z said they would like to save, but don't make enough money. And roughly 2 in 5 millennials and Gen Z adults feel it's harder to build financial wealth now than when their parents were their age because of the economy.
Okay, so I agree with it being harder right now to build financial wealth, but the other stat with only 30% of Gen Z wanting to be able to save, but they can't make enough money, does that mean 70% don't want to save at all? I don't know what the other options were for that survey because 70% seems like a really bad number to me if that many people do not care at all and they'll have no savings for the future.
27-year-old Victoria Franklin has been living with her mother in New Jersey since she graduated college in 2019.
I saw all of the money that I was saving and I thought maybe I should stay home for a little bit, and I didn't feel an urgency to move out.
Not everyone is enthusiastic about this trend.
You guys are making 6 figures together. You can't tell me you can't afford a house. They just don't want to spend their money. Told ya.
36% of Americans said in a 2022 survey that more young adults living with their parents is bad for society. So here's why young Americans are choosing to live with their parents and what the implications are for the US economy.
Okay, so before we get into the rest of the video, you could clearly see this is somebody who is upper middle or upper class. So I do think it's funny the disconnect between news stations and the real world because they're interviewing somebody who is in much better of a position than most of the people in the country are. But there still are similarities to what many are going through right now, and I wanted to show you what New Jersey real estate looks like right now. So I ended up looking this up online because this is about 40 minutes away from where I actually lived. By the size of the house, you'd probably think it's pretty expensive. There's a little bit more context later in the video, but we could take a look at the area around where she is. Look at the pricing of these houses. I mean, there's not even that much listed. 3 million there, 700,000 I guess is reasonable in comparison. 550 for this little thing. So this woman is actually the exact same age as me from New Jersey. So a lot of similarities, and basically the reason why I left New Jersey and moved to North Carolina. Just look at the prices of these houses. Now, this is where the story is taking place around here right now. And I used to live right up about here. So you can see that the prices were much cheaper where I actually lived compared to what we're seeing here. But this is a even worse situation, how expensive it is in New Jersey. So that's just a little bit more context of where they are and the pricing that we're seeing in 2024 in this area.
My name is Victoria Franklin. I am 27 years old and I live in my childhood home with my mother and my boyfriend.
Victoria graduated from the University of Miami in 2019 and moved in with her mom when she was looking for a job.
After I saw the cost of living and things like that after I graduated, that maybe I'd be home for about a year.
More than half of Gen Z adults say they don't make enough money to live the life they want due to high cost of living.
Especially in New
I was
Jersey.
bartending and waitressing until October, where I got my first offer, so it did take a little bit longer than I expected. Currently live at the Jersey Shore, and I was commuting into New York City, which takes about 2 hours each way. And I thought, you know, in 6 months or so, I'll move into the city, be closer to the job, and the pandemic threw a wrench in those plans.
Victoria now works a fully remote job, which she says she probably wouldn't have if it weren't for the pandemic. Without a commute to worry about, she was able to stay at her mom's for longer.
I mean, going into New York would probably have been even more expensive than staying in New Jersey, but that commute is rough. But now she actually works from home. So again, she's in a better situation compared to a lot of people right now. Many work from home jobs are being pulled back into the office. But the stat that more than half of Gen Z don't make enough to live the life they want seems a little iffy to me, because as we've seen from previous videos, many of the generation that's around my age want the influencer celebrity lifestyle. All the stuff that they see online, even though they might be making six figures, that still won't most likely pay for the mansions and the Lambos and going out to eat all the time and the constant vacations they see. So that ends up contributing to the debt and funding a lifestyle that most honestly won't be able to afford.
It's a lot harder for young people today to save up for, markers of the American dream than it was for previous generations. Part of the reason we see this escalation of young adults not leaving the nest or returning to the nest is this idea that it was harder and harder for them to weather shocks. And so, for example, if they suffered a layoff or they suffered some sort of health shock or they got in a car accident, if they didn't have any additional credit to weather that shock, they would end up moving back home. The financial stability of young adults, their ability to pay for things if they got into an emergency, was one of the big factors influencing whether or not they were living on their own or living with their parents.
A significant number of Gen Z adults and millennials lack emergency savings. In fact, 46% of millennials and 32% of Gen Z have more credit card debt than emergency savings.
That's so
This
terrible.
can have ramifications for setting up a financial future.
Roughly 1 in 4 Gen Z adults say housing costs are one of the biggest challenges to financial success.
The prices of homes has escalated over the last few decades much faster than actual incomes. So it is actually much harder for a millennial or a Gen Z to save up for a down payment to buy a home. And that's something that bears out in the data.
The pandemic did have a lot to do with it. I saw how much I was saving and I was like, maybe I shouldn't be paying, upwards of $3,000 a month and making somebody else richer when I could stay at home, save that money and spend it on where I want to spend it. Between my job and my bartending and waitressing, I make anywhere from $85,000 to $95,000 a year.
So $90,000 seems like good money, but not for New Jersey. It's the exact reason why I moved down to North Carolina, because the same kind of townhouse that I'm in right now is literally double the rent in New Jersey. Believe me, I searched all the time. But she does have a work from home job and makes good money. So it kind of sounds like to me she needs to do what I did and get out of there and live in a cheaper area.
I would say about 40 to 50% of my salary is going right into savings. My mentality is, why rent and give my money to someone else when I can start to own? And so a big chunk of that money is going to go towards a down payment on a house.
Young adults ages 25 to 34 in high cost of living areas are more likely to live with their parents. Nearly 26% of young adults in New Jersey were living with at least one of their parents in 2022. The median household income in Oceanport, New Jersey, where the Franklins live, was nearly $133,000 in 2022, while the median value of a home in the region was around $644,000.
My dad built this house for $350,000 and was making probably $10,000 to $15,000 less than I was. My mom wasn't working at the time, and they were able to afford a $350,000 house on a $70,000 a year salary with a son. And that is just, that's not even the American dream anymore. That's not even possible.
Okay, so we get a little bit more context. They were lucky enough to build the house for relatively cheap. I mean, it did look like a monster house. They do look well off now, driving around in a Mercedes. I guarantee her dad's another New Jersey contractor with a big booming business because the whole area is pretty wealthy, and he makes a ton of money because that house is probably worth double, if not more than that now. But even with that $70K back then, it's just not realistic with inflation in today's world.
My aunt, who I fight with all the time, is always saying how you have to give somewhere, right? And my cousin said something to her the other day and said, we're giving everywhere. We don't get property. We don't get good school systems. Whatever we're trading off is too much to trade off.
Victoria had brought up some conflict with her aunt a few times.
Oh, this is my Aunt Judy.
So I asked Aunt Judy to come on over and talk to us.
I talked about how much we fight about millennials, yes, but millennials living at home, and how you always say, well, you have to sacrifice something, but how much we're sacrificing. we don't get like a big property, or we don't get like a nice house, or it's not in a good school system.
You have to start somewhere. You have to start anywhere. Just start your portfolio is what I told you. I don't care what it is. You don't have to live in Oceanport your first time.
No, but you were able to live in Oceanport the first time.
Okay, I guess it was different times.
So this is actually where you could see the disconnect between the Gen X and boomers with younger people. Clearly Oceanport seems like a very wealthy area, and her complaining to her niece that she's kind of just being lazy and should be able to afford a place just shows how different it was back then, because honestly, living in New Jersey for almost my entire life, if you want a house that's reasonably priced, either it's going to be destroyed and you have to completely rebuild it, or you're going to be in a bad area. With how expensive it is to live in New Jersey, and there are tons of towns that are super wealthy, super upper class, very rich people, there are many, many bad towns, dangerous towns all over New Jersey. So it's a lot easier for her to say, oh, it was a different time back then. I was able to live in Oceanport right off the bat, but you got to go move somewhere else that I guess is either really run down or dangerous.
Gen X and baby boomers may have a tougher time understanding what young adults are going through today because they enjoyed, until the pandemic recession hit, a solid almost 15 years of uninterrupted economic expansion. Baby boomers, Gen X, they weathered many economic downturns, including major recessions. But I think the big difference is that when they were starting to form their own households and starting to accumulate wealth, housing and higher ed were both more affordable relative to their incomes than they are now.
When I started out, I was making $35,000 a year. That was nothing. And he was making $35,000 a year. You guys are making six figures together. You can't tell me you can't afford a house. They just don't want to spend their money.
Told ya.
I'm sorry.
No, I don't know.
Did you want it? What was my first house? 250 maybe? 270?
That doesn't exist anymore. Where am I finding a $270,000
I'm
house?
not making $35,000 a year. Combined, we made 70.
In 1995, $70,000 was the equivalent of $145,000 today.
Look at that, see?
I do think it's funny. They are so Jersey. It's insane. I love it. But that is just the disconnect. She's $50,000 off from being able to somewhat afford it with the $85,000, $95,000 I think she said she made. The prices now for housing is just so much more than what it was a few generations ago. I'm even getting that here now. I've been here in North Carolina for a little bit over a year, and maybe some places in the housing market have kind of stagnated or even gone down in certain areas. Not mine. Mine has gone up nonstop since I got here. I am basically priced out as well. If I do want to buy a house, I'm looking at places 30, 35 minutes away from where I live, and it's not even in the realm of what we saw with any of the New Jersey prices.
We do also have a situation that what is really good for an individual person or an individual family is not necessarily good for the entire macroeconomy.
The Federal Reserve estimates in a 2019 paper that young adults who move out of their parents' house would spend around $13,000 more per year on things such as housing, food, and transportation.
One of the big boosts to consumer spending is when people form households. Whether you're a renter or a buyer, you need to furnish that house. You need to fix things up in the home to make it livable. You end up spending a lot of money during that time.
So the stat that says that young adults spend $13,000 more a year when they're on their own seems super low to me. I don't know where they pulled that from. I know, of course, it varies a lot, but I would say that I spend about $3,000 a month to do everything that I need to do. Could be a little bit higher, could be a little bit lower, but of course, all the bills being paid, food, possibly maintenance for the car, gas, anything that pops up. And again, I'm in a lower cost of living than I would have been if I lived in New Jersey. So I think the $13,000 is way less.
So if the pace of household formation slows down, then that's going to slow down the pace of consumer spending, and that will produce a drag on the economy.
Another issue is that there aren't enough affordable properties in popular areas for younger people who are in entry-level jobs and making less money.
Yep.
Any sort of housing policy needs to be multi-pronged. Are there homes that are at the price point of these prospective home buyers? What can we do to increase the housing supply? What can we do to build? What can we do to help elder Americans, to help them downsize and move into more right-sized sized homes that will open up larger homes for young families.
First, having more affordable housing in very popular areas where most of the jobs are. We've talked about this before. It is never affordable. Say if they have new apartment complexes coming out, or single family, duplex, triplex, townhouses, whatever you want, new construction to try to help people live closer to their jobs. It is never ever affordable. It is always new luxury townhomes coming soon, starting at these ridiculous prices. It basically does the exact opposite. The only people that are moving there are super wealthy people because the prices are so much higher than any of the other housing that's around already. And the second thing, I thought the comment at the end talking about boomers kind of trying to kick them out of their houses and downsize to help out the younger generation, I guess, buy those homes. First off, if that does happen, it's not like any of those houses are getting sold for less than their Zillow value or, market value is what I'm trying to say. So they're still going to be priced through the roof, basically not going to be affordable for a majority of the people. And honestly, to play devil's advocate, if I was a boomer, I was old, I was retired, and I was still 100% there, I didn't need some assistance to keep on surviving, old people retirement community, I'd still want to live in my house until I died, and I would assume it would be a pretty big house. I'd like to have children one day, so it wouldn't be like I'd have a 1-bedroom, 1-bath. It would probably be a decent sized house for a few people to live in at least. So I don't know. I just thought that comment was interesting, but we'll move on.
So I think one alone is not really going to do it. We've got to look both at demand as well as supply.
The other major factor here is how much student loan debt young Americans have. 59% of US adults say they've delayed financial milestones because of their student debt.
I do have a student loan payment. It's about $480 a month. So that's my largest expense.
The liability could be worse for Black borrowers, who tend to have higher than average student loan debt and less wealth than white counterparts. Black and Hispanic respondents were more likely to say that debt was holding them back from reaching financial milestones. Less than half of white respondents said the same.
The amount of debt young adults held also rose substantially between 2005 and 2014, during that period of strong escalation in that cohort living with their parents.
Aggregate student loans are such an enormous part of the economy now, and that's not a reflection of younger people making bad choices with their education. It's really a consequence in large part due to the fact that there's less public funding and going to college just is more expensive, which makes it even harder for even those college grads who are hoping to get earning more money as a result of their college degrees.
Student loan debt by itself can't explain the phenomenon, especially considering so many European countries with much less student loan debt have higher rates of young adults living with their parents.
24 out of 29 European countries had more 18 to 34-year-olds living with their parents in 2021 than the US. It was over 70% in Italy, Portugal, Greece, Serbia, and Croatia.
So this I thought was pretty interesting. Now, I know that some cultures are very family-centric. I know a lot of Asian cultures and Hispanic cultures will have several generations of family in their house all living together, mainly really cutting down the cost of living because everybody's kind of chipping in together. But that's just not how it is in the US. I know there are a million different situations for everybody. Maybe you don't get along with your family. Maybe they kicked you out at 18 years old. I get it. It's not like everybody could do the exact same thing, but there is a culture of as soon as you go off to college and you have your 4 years of living in dorms, I guess at 21, you're instantly supposed to get a job that pays really well, enough to put a down payment on a house. I don't know where you got that money because you basically could only really work part-time while you're at college or university, and you're supposed to just hit the ground running and I guess start a family and make a ton of money right away. It's just not really how it works anymore, and there's a lot of pushback because people around my age can't survive off of it. They can't even really rent. I'm in the position that I am right now because my parents let me stay there for a number of years. I was socking away as much money as I possibly could. I wasn't going on crazy vacations and spending a whole bunch of money on Gucci and getting some, BMW M3 and whatever else. So I'm lucky enough to not be underwater right now, but a lot of my generation is.
My boyfriend is Brazilian, and multi-generational homes are very common in almost everywhere else in the world, except in the United States.
What I just said.
I'm just taking a page of their playbook.
The Americans are probably the only people that they're not multi-generations in one house. And I don't have a problem with it. I mean, I think it's kind of nice. Why do we have to be so cold to push everybody out?
There are a lot of cultures out there in which it is normal to live with your parents until you get married. And I don't think there's necessarily an economic explanation for that.
The Franklins would say in the US, it is the economy. But Victoria's mom is kind of okay with it.
Unfortunately, it is the economy and the world that we live in that just doesn't allow them to go live a comfortable life. So with them living here was no big deal. It's not really a problem. They're saving their money. Eventually they'll buy a house, and that works.
I know I probably keep smiling in the background, but if you didn't say where they were from, I would almost guarantee that I would guess it's from New Jersey. They look 100% like they're from Jersey. But we could go over to some of the comments from this video. Nobody talks about how upper middle classes who live outside of their parents' home are actually being financially supported by their parents. I could also see that being very common where it was up northeast because of the pricing. Most of their kids can't keep up, especially right out of college or even several years after it with a full-time job. So maybe the stats for that could get even worse. Should have bought a house in '98 instead of going to kindergarten. What was I thinking? We've seen that a ton of times. You could point fingers all day, but the hard truth is money isn't circulating through the economy. It's climbing straight to the top and staying there. And here's another one of the few cultures where it isn't normal to have family live together under one household. Those who live together generally keep a lot more generational wealth and have a lot more financial stability during hard times. I 100% agree. I have friends in New Jersey where they still live with their parents and their grandparents all in the household. Everybody's working and they're a lot more financially stable than if I was up in Jersey trying to rent a place or buy a single family house for way more than it should be. And I guess it is much more of a culture thing. Even with it being in the US, they are Hispanic and it's just a lot more common in their culture than it is all over America now. Cost of living increases, but income does not. This is rocket science to older people. Now, I have seen that a lot of the older generation do feel sorry because they realize how much more difficult it is for the 20s and 30-year-olds to do the exact same thing that they were doing. But it was funny to see that clip of just the disconnect and not realizing that the money she made back then actually could afford a house in a pretty nice area, and it's just out of the question now. Living with your parents is not a problem if the family atmosphere is good mental health, wallet, and environmentally friendly. I mean, yeah, there are more reasons other than I guess the majority of what you would probably see. The primary focus of staying with your parents is to just save more money. And I made a dedicated video talking about this months ago, and it was very hit or miss. A lot of my generation agreed that it was very difficult, and they were trying to save as much money to have the American dream one day. And then there were a lot of older people just saying that the younger generation are lazy. They were mooching off of it. I guess everybody was sitting and playing COD for 8 hours a day, and none of my generation was actually working. I'm not saying it's like that. I bet a whole bunch of people take advantage of it with their family members or roommates or whatever. But honestly, it's just a fact now that Millennial and Gen Z have it harder to do the exact same thing. We're not talking about upper class beachfront properties and having multiple houses in different parts of this country or the world or whatever. It's just the normal middle class life. So that's all I have for you guys today. YouTube thinks you'll like this video popping up on screen right now, but hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like, and I'll talk to you guys later.